Hey guys, it's Penelope in London, and I've got a good one for this week. It's Mars square Venus. It's actually going to be a 12-month dance. So if you're interested in Mars and Venus particularly, then you may enjoy this. And it contains the mythology, and there's going to be four exact squares between now and between July. So I'm going to show you when that happened because today is August the 6th. And this chart is 10 p.m. in London and British summertime. And also, we can see here, before I go ahead, that Venus has moved into the sign of Libra, which is great. It's at home, isn't it, in Libra, because it's connected. So Venus in Libra is where we have a strong need for relationship, and we also require our relationships to be harmonious, peaceful, and creative. So that will be an interesting one for us, despite what's going on with these squares. So let's see. And also, what we're talking about really is what's the shape of what's going on and the things to come over the next 12 months. And this is a sustained, reoccurring, evolving tension between Mars and Venus that is unlike the brief encounters these two planets usually have, because Venus is quicker than Mars, and you've got Mercury, and then you've got Venus, and then Mars, and they all move at different speeds. So this is occurring because there's going to be a retrograde, but in October with Venus and then also Mercury retrograde. So listen in if you're interested in what's going on and upcoming for us. So it's a dynamic tension of four separate times across four very different pairs of signs. So it's going to happen in different signs when it squares. And there's going to be retrogrades on both sides, deepening and complicating the story as it unfolds. So this is not a single transit I'm talking about right now. It's a dance. And like all the best dances, it has a beginning, a deepening, a turning point, and a resolution. And before I go into detail, if there's anything I share that resonates with you and you'd like to bring into contact your own chart with me, I do readings individually, and the booking link is in the description below, so you can check out my booking link. And do not hesitate to hit the like button if this video is useful to you or you find it good. That would be really good for me. So the mythology, before I go here to the mythology, what I'm going to do is go days back, and I'm going to show you this first square that I'm referring to. So you can see here that you've got Mars in Gemini at 22 degrees, and you've also got Venus up here in Virgo at 22 degrees. And I did a video about this and brought in Lilith on this one, True Lilith, a few days ago, so you can check out that if you want to. So the mythology, Aries and Aphrodite. So Aries, not as in Aries, but Ares, so Aries. And before we look at the squares themselves, as I've said, I'm going to spend some time on the mythology, because understanding the mythology and who Mars and Venus are in that sense, in the traditional sense, changes how we feel about what we're doing when they aspect each other. In the Greek tradition, they are Ares, so Ares, and Aphrodite. And their story is one of the most charged and most complicated divine love affairs in the entire mythological stories, like canon. So Ares is the god of war, and not the strategic, intelligent warfare of Athena, but the raw, instinctual, often brutal force of combat itself. He is a drive without strategy, passion without calculation, and the will that asserts itself with maximum force and minimum negotiation. So you can imagine that type of character. He is feared rather than loved by other gods. Even his own parents, Zeus and Hera, Hera, find him difficult. He's too much, too loud, too violent, too relentlessly forceful. And in the Iliad, Homer describes him as the most hated of the gods, and yet he is also in the mythology extremely attractive. And there is something about the uncomplicated directness of pure masculine drive that draws the eye, even when it disturbs the peace. if we think about films and movies and all sorts of things that we see in the world, we can understand that idea. So, Aphrodite, Venus, in the Roman tradition, is the goddess of love, beauty, and desire. And she was born in the oldest version of the myth from the sea foam that formed around severed genitals of Uranus. Now, I didn't know that, but this is very interesting. And when Uranus's genitals fell into the ocean, which tells you something important about her nature, she is not simply sweetness and romantic feeling. So Aphrodite is not just sweetness and Venus. She arises from the deep, from the ancient wound of the masculine, from the place where what was cut off and fell from the sky into the water and generated something different, very different. So she is beauty born from depth, and she is love that carries the memory of severance with it. And Aphrodite was married to an Olympian, she was married in the Olympian mythology to, I'm going to hopefully say this correctly because I've been practicing this. So Hephaestus, I think it's pronounced. So she was married to the lame craftsman god, the maker, the one who works patiently in the forge with the fire and metal to create things of extraordinary beauty and utility. And the marriage was arranged. So that was an arranged marriage for her by Zeus. And it was not a love match. And Aphrodite did not choose Hephaestus. And so she chose Ares. And their love affair is one of the worst kept secrets at that time on Olympus, because everyone knows about it and everyone has opinions about it. And eventually Hephaestus, tipped off by the sun god Helios, who sees everything, so the sun god Helios, who sees everything, constructs an invisible net of extraordinary craftsmanship and catches them together in bed, dragging them before the assembled gods in their entanglement. So the scene is played for comedy in Homer, and the gods laugh at the court lovers. They were caught, so the gods are laughing. But underneath the comedy is something far more complex. Aphrodite, the principle of love and beauty and genuine desire, is trapped in a marriage not of her choosing. And we know this goes on even to this date, that people are trapped in marriages not of their choosing. And this is for men and women as well. It's not just women, people are trapped in things. And not of their choosing, reaches towards the most direct and uncomplicated expression of masculine force available to her. And Ares, the war god, feared and avoided by everyone, is reached for by the most beautiful goddess of Olympus. So what each is finding in the other is exactly what their own nature lacks. So what they find in each other is what their own nature lacks. And Aphrodite, whose love tends towards grace and beauty and the harmonious, is drawn to the raw, unmediated power of Ares. Ares, whose force tends towards destruction and conflict, is drawn to the beauty and love of Aphrodite. And so the square, this is where this gets interesting. So if you look at the pointer here, if you can see this moving around the chart, if you're looking, or you may just want to listen, you've got 22 degrees, so you can see this square. You can see now there's a bit more depth to what's going on here than just Mars square Venus. So the square between them in the chart carries this same quality, the tension of two different principles that are drawn to each other and that challenge each other at the same time, that generate both creativity and friction precisely because they are so different. So their union also produces children in the mythology. So in their union of Aphrodite and Ares, they produce children. And we have Eros, desire itself, the winged god whose arrows pierce both gods and mortals, and Anteros, requited love, the answer to Eros's arrow, and Harmonia, the goddess of harmony, and Concord, born from the union of war and love, and Phobos and Demios, if I'm pronouncing that correct, Deimos, Deimos, which is known as fear and dread, the dark companions of Ares in battle. So the whole spectrum of what love and desire can be, from the highest harmony to the deepest fear, is born from the union of these two. And this square between Mars and Venus in the sky is the tension that precedes and generates that full spectrum. So when we look at this now, we can see it in a whole different way. So Mars, and this was July the 30th, it was still in a square. If I go a day back, 21 degrees in a square, and then you go back and 20 degrees, it was in a square, you can see, and then 19 degrees, 18. So this square has been going on for quite some time. If we go back, so you can see 14, 16, this was the 22nd of July. So let's go back to the 30th of July. And what Mars square Venus means, this is a good bit. So in astrology, the square is an aspect of dynamic tension, two planets 90 degrees apart, sharing the same modality, but no other common ground in a relationship of productive friction that demands conscious navigation. So the whole thing is conscious navigation, and Mars can be impulsive, and Venus, can have desire, I guess, as well. That is also unconscious too. So we've got our consciousness and our unconscious aspects. The square does not flow easily. Squares do not flow easily, and there's nothing bad about that. It does not harmonize automatically. It creates pressure. That's what a square does. It requires something of us, an active engagement, a conscious choice about how to work with the tension rather than simply being pushed around by it. So let's say we want something, we want to create more cash flow, or we want to create better health, then we have to do something in order for that to happen. It's not going to happen on its own. We can't just sit and wish that, things to fall into our lap. Now, Mars square Venus is the tension between the masculine and the feminine principle in their most fundamental expression. So Mars is the drive to assert, to act, and to penetrate. And we've all got this in us, male, female, we've all got this going on. Mars to drive and assert and to act and to penetrate, to get to what we want. So to go after what is wanted with direct force. And we can look where Mars is in our chart as an example and how our Mars works. I have Mars at 24 degrees of Taurus in my sixth house, conjunct my Mercury at 23 degrees and my North Node at 25 degrees of Taurus. So my Mars up there and my Venus is in Aries at 18 degrees. So I can see that a lot of what I do is about creativity and such like. So Venus is the drive to attract, to receive, to create beauty and connection, to draw toward. That's Venus, rather than push towards. It's not about pushing towards something, which is Mars. It's about drawing something towards us. And in the square, there are two impulses. These two impulses are in friction. Neither can simply proceed without encountering the other's resistance. So there's resistance there as well. The action of Mars is complicated because by the values of Venus, the receptivity of Venus is activated and disturbed by the force of Mars, or it can be. And at a personal level, Mars square Venus in transit touches the territory of desire, what we want and how we go after it. So this is what's going on for us individually. So we would look to our own chart and see where these are playing out. That's what we would do. And that's a deeper level of astrology. And the tension between the way we assert ourselves and the way we relate to others, between independence and connection, because that is wonderful to have some independence and then connection, between the self that acts and the self that loves. It can bring a quality of impatience in relationships also, the Mars energy wanting to move faster, more directly than the Venus energy is comfortable with. Or it can bring a quality of suppressed desire. So sometimes we suppress our desires and the Venus energy pulling back from what the Mars energy wants to reach towards. So the invitation of the square is to find the form of action that is genuinely in service of what is truly valued. So what is truly valued, and that is the most important thing, to let Mars be tempered by what Venus loves and Venus be activated by what Mars is driving towards. So at a collective level, Mars square Venus describes this tension in the collective field, because this chart that we're looking at right now is a collective chart. It's not, it's not my chart. It's not your personal chart. This is a collective chart, the collective field between the masculine and feminine principles as they are operating in culture and in power structures. And in information environment as well, because this information environment with Mars in Gemini is about information and whose desire gets to be direct and whose must be managed through attraction, who acts and who receives. So where force meets beauty and what happens in that meeting. So now we're going to look at the four squares. So the one I'm looking at right now is the one we were talking about. And this first square was exact on July 29th, and 21 degrees, Gemini square, Mars in Gemini square Venus in Virgo. So the opening movement of this dance is the square we have already been working with. Mars in Gemini here, squaring Venus in Virgo, you can see. And I did, when I looked at this, and I made a video a few days ago, I involved true Lilith in Sagittarius because she was opposing Mars at that point, squaring Venus at the same time. So that formed what we would call a T square, shaped like a T square. I looked at it in detail in my recent video. So this first square sets out a theme. Okay, Mars in Gemini is acting through communication. So Mars is acting through communication in this chart at this moment that I'm showing you, which is around the end of July. And Gemini is acting, Gemini is fast, agile, circulating information, and Venus in Virgo, which is very interesting, is discerning and looks at the actual facts. What's very interesting here is that Venus is in Virgo, and this is a connection with Mercury. And so Mars in Gemini is also, they're both ruled by Mercury. So that's quite an interesting, something I thought of earlier. Gemini, communication, and we've got Venus, Virgo, which is about precise, being that it's precise information between the information that circulates at speed, Mars, and then the careful examination of whether it is actually true, which is Venus in Virgo. Is this actually true? So if you've got an Excel sheet, in order to get the right total, you've got to put in the absolute, correct details in order to get to what you're trying to balance. So when I spoke on the Lilith connection, Lilith in Sagittarius was opposing Mars and added the dimension of the expelled truth teller. So the one whose truth is too inconvenient for the fast circulating Mars in Gemini. So let's look at something simple. We can look at the Fauci thing that's going on at the moment. You may know what I'm referring to. In the U.S.A. or also the Epstein files. It's like, if we look at that, it's the expelled truth teller. So people are bringing up the truth, and then it's inconvenient for Mars in Gemini, the information environment. It's inconvenient for a lot of people that people are speaking up. This first square that we're looking at now is the one that announces the theme of the whole dance. So this is going to be so interesting what's going to go on, because as I move in, and if you're still here, Venus is going to go retrograde in Scorpio and in October, and then follow, I think about a week later or so, Mercury is going to go retrograde in Scorpio. So this is really gets exciting. So the first square is the theme, this theme of the whole dance. What is the relationship between desire and truth? So what is the relationship between desire and truth? Because a lot of what people desire, whether it be power or power over other, even in relationship or over the collective, there's also the truth that we have to deal with between action and genuine value. So if there's, truth is omitted, then there's no genuine value of another when we're dealing with each other. So between the masculine drive to communicate and move, the feminine capacity to discern what actually matters. So what actually matters, and we've sort of got a bit lost in that space of what actually matters when it comes to all sorts of things. We can even look at data centers, like, does the earth actually matter? If we're spraying the skies, does our health actually matter with the foods we eat? There's so many things that we can cover with this. What actually matters, truthfully. Now, the second square is going to be around October 10th. So I'm going to go forward now and I'm going to change this chart up here to the 10th of October. If you bear with me, if you watch what I'm doing, you can see I'm putting the date up there, 2026, 10th of October. So if I've gone here, the 10th of October, 2026. So now if we look at this chart here, we have, at this point, we've got Mars in Leo at 7 degrees, and then we've got Venus retrograde at that point in the sign of Scorpio. You can see that RX there. That's little teeny little X. It says RX retrograde. So if I go back and we remember that's the 10th of October, and we're going to see. So on the 1st of October, 2026, October 1st, Venus is still at 8 degrees and she's direct. But then if we go 10 days, no, actually not 10 days, we go 2nd of October, we see their station, you see and then RX. So that's the 4th of October. But the next square that happens is here, because what's going to happen is Venus, if you're following here, Venus is going to go retrograde, which means that it's going to be in square again with Mars. But there's Venus retrograde works differently to Venus direct. And also in January, Mars will go retrograde. So this is why it's ongoing. So this is the 10th here. So you can see it's retrograde, 7 degrees. So this is a different conversation we're having at this point. So the second square, Mars, 7 degrees of Leo, square, Venus retrograde at 7 degrees of Scorpio. So this is the heart of the dance. The most charged, is very charged, the most psychologically intense and the most personally felt of the 4 squares, because Mars has moved into Leo, the sign of the sovereign creative self of the individual heart in full radiant expression of the courage to be seen and to shine. And Venus stationed retrograde in Scorpio. I've got Scorpio rising at 27 degrees, so I understand what a bit of Scorpio is about. As many of us do who understand astrology, we get the idea. So 7 days earlier, on October the 3rd, which I showed you, she is at 7 degrees of Scorpio retrograde, turning inward into the most psychologically demanding sign of the zodiac, which Scorpio is. It's the underground, it's Persephone, and it's the platonic stuff. It's very deep. And Mars is connected also with Pluto as well, and Scorpio in the 8th house. So Leo and Scorpio are in a square, and they share this fixed modality, but nothing else. And Leo wants to radiate outward, the sun, to be seen, to express the heart's truth and warmth and generosity. And Scorpio wants to go inward and downward into the depth and the darkness, and what cannot be seen in the ordinary light. So Mars in Leo is the creative masculine at full force, and asserting, performing, claiming the space to be fully visibly itself. And Venus retrograde in Scorpio is the feminine principle turning inward in the most hidden and most psychologically intense territory available. So this gets really interesting. And they are at cross purposes at this point and in full dynamic tension because of the square. So how this is going to play out, it's going to be what I find is interesting is that the more we understand the mythology and the charts, and if we look, I know that Carl Gustav Jung was using charts and did his own chart, and he used astrology with people when he got hit roadblocks sometimes. So astrology is a very brilliant tool to not sensationalize astrology and go like, oh, Jupiter's in Leo and so-and-so's in this full moon. I mean, there's a lot of is that right? You get me. So what, it's making everything fantastic and everything's going to be brilliant. Well, it's not. That's not the way life works. We go through many different emotions a day, as an example, and to get to a place of balance or homeostasis is challenging for all of us, because we're all bumping into different things in the outside world and in our own lives, and even with our health. As an example, I was going along very well, and then in around March or April, my front hip, I heard this little snapping thing on my front hip when I was walking. So I started guarding myself as I was walking, meaning being more mindful so that I didn't hear this little snapping thing. And then I had some physiotherapy, and then by July, for the whole month of July, I've literally been, I can only do like half a step with my left leg. So then I've had an x-ray which shows, thankfully, so grateful that my hips are not, they're just normal for the age group that I am. I've got no arthritis or anything else going on. So what I need to do is work it through and do some exercises, and I've got some physio coming up. So enough about me, but that's just as an example. I had all these great plans and ideas, and then the whole of July was literally, I've spent in this pain physical thing going on, which is now easing off, thankfully, because when we have those things, we can think they're never going to disappear. But I guess I've made good use of it. It's made me slow down a bit because I had no choice. So now we're going back to Venus retrograde in Scorpio as the feminine principle turning inward into the most hidden and most psychologically intense territory. So Venus retrograde in Scorpio is doing something very specific. She is going back into the underworld, the territory of the soul ties. So of intimacy at the level that cannot be performed or managed or shared, of shared resources and shared wounds, and the truth of what has been felt but not spoken in the deepest relational territory. And she is asking, here, what is actually the truth? So this truth thing is coming up again. What is actually the truth beneath the performance, beneath the arrangement, beneath what has been agreed? Because, governments agree things with us, or we try and agree things, and we try and agree things with each other. But sometimes there's this underlying thing where the truth really is not really being dealt with. It's sort of pushed to a side. And because of that, we've got these genuine feelings which get stuffed down, where we can't say what we need to say, or things are withheld. And then what is suppressed, it can affect our health when we're suppressing things in the name of keeping the peace. We're going to keep the peace just because we don't want to, confront a situation. And that's not the way to go. So now when Mercury stations retrograde, this is it, on Scorpio, October 24th, 2 weeks after the square, adding the mind and the word to the same inward scorpionic territory. So from October the 24th to November the 13th, both Venus and Mercury are retrograde in Scorpio. So you tell me. Right, I'm going to move this chart ahead. And when I say you tell me, I'm sure you know what I mean. We don't know until we know in our individual lives, more to the point. So it's going to go retrograde. I've got the 22nd, 23rd. There you go. Stations. Watch Mercury here. See, it's that little S is in black font. And if I go a day ahead, 23rd, depends on the hours. But you can see it's stationed. And then it's retrograde. And it is in. And look, then we have the sun in Scorpio as well at 2 degrees. And then also Venus at that point has moved back into the sign of Venus. I'm sorry, the sign of Libra. That's what I meant. So we know that 2 weeks, that's the 20th, I've got the 25th of October up there. So, and that's going on until the 13th. So both Venus and Mercury retrograde at the same time. And the feeling life and the thinking life have been both turned inward, because this is inward stuff. And it's like excavating psychological depth, both asking what has been kept in the underground and now needs to be brought to the surface. So what needs to be brought to the surface? So it's like a double retrograde in Scorpio during the Mars-Venus square. This is concentrated and it's very rich and it's part of the entire 12-month dance. And for these two planets in fixed signs, Taurus, if we look, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, for those, sorry, with planets, if you've got planets in Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, roughly between 5 and 21 degrees, then this is more felt. So depending on what your chart is, the retrograde Venus will be making contact with natal placements in those degrees. And the Mars-Venus square will be activating those placements. So everybody's chart's different. So we can't generalize about astrology because we've all got different birth dates. We're all born in different places. We've all got different rising signs. We're very individual. Now, the third square is going to be on January the 16th, 2027. So the 16th of January, I like this ring of that 2027. I do. And in human design, this is goes into the gate of the cross of the sleeping phoenix, not the gate, which is something else. You can Google that if you wish, the cross of the sleeping phoenix, human design. But I might talk about that another time. I don't know as much about that, but I know my own human design chart quite well. So what we have is the third square, and then Mars at that point is also retrograde. Look here, 10 degrees. Now, if we go back, because Mars is probably going retrograde around the 8th, look, there's Mars in Virgo, and we've got stations on the 9th, January 9th, then it goes into retrograde, and then if we go to the 16th to understand this next square, so you've got 10, look, you've got Venus up there in Sagittarius, and you've got Mars in Virgo. So by January 2027, the dance has turned, and Mars stationed retrograde, and that's at 10 degrees of Virgo, 6 days before the third exact square. So now it is Mars who is retrograde, and Venus is then direct. Now, the energy of this dance has reversed, where in October it was about Venus turning inward, while Mars remained direct and active in Leo. In January, it's about Mars turning inward into Virgo, and Venus has moved into Sagittarius and is aiming her arrow toward meaning and truth, because this is ultimate Sagittarius. What is the truth? And Mars retrograde in Virgo is very different as well. It's the drive toward inward, towards the details, inward details, towards the examination of what has not been working inwardly, towards the reassessment of our own strategy and method that we use. And where Mars moves direct, when it's direct, it's outward, it's an outward force, it's out there. And Mars retrograde is the force that is actually in service of what I genuinely want. Is this what I genuinely want? Mars retrograde is asking, is this what I really want? Like, we might be sitting there for those weeks that it's going on and think, oh, is this really what I really want? And it depends how you ask that question. This will depend on what house it's in for you. For me, that will be in my 9th house, Virgo. Virgo is my 9th house and 10th house. And so and then that Venus is in my 1st house at that time. Very interesting. So when Mars, and this is what you need to look at, where is this happening for you? So Mars retrograde, we know that it's asking what it's asking in Virgo. The retrograde is particularly precise. It's about self-examination, examining ourselves, because I would imagine between now, what's going on collectively, there's going to be a lot of changes that are going to happen in the coming months that are going to force us into self-examination. And Virgo does not accept vague answers. It wants the specific detail, the honest accounting of where things have gone wrong, where things have gone. And again, we can see that playing out currently with certain things. So Venus in Sagittarius squaring that retrograde Mars is the feminine principle shooting her arrow towards the larger truth, while the masculine principle is in a period of review and self-assessment. So maybe that's good that the masculine principle in that point is in review. If we think about this, in a period of review and self-assessment. So the masculine principle, self-assessment. What am I doing here? How am I behaving? What am I supposed to be here in this? There is something in this third square about the vision being clearer than the method. So Venus in Sagittarius at this point can see the direction because they can see way ahead, Sagittarius, and can feel the philosophical truth of where things need to go, what is right. So while Mars retrograde in Virgo is still working out how to get there, how are we going to get there? What needs to happen? So this tension here is between knowing and doing, between the expansive philosophical reach of Sagittarius and the detailed self-critical review of Virgo. So self-critical review is a healthy thing that we all need to do in order to move forward. Now, the fourth square, and we're nearly there, I have to tell you that this isn't going to go on forever because I'm covering a huge period and 4 different slots of this, the fourth square. This is why this is a bit of a longer video. But you can come back to this and look at the degrees and try and understand it some more. And also the story of Aries and Athena. So let's go here to the next one. Oh, sorry, Aphrodite. I was thinking Athena was mentioned also, but in a different context. So fourth square, June 23rd, 2027. So that seems like such a long way away. But time flies, as we know, but not too fast. So now I'm putting in the date of June 23rd of June 2027. And we have here, we've got Mars at 18 degrees and we've got Venus. Now, this is interesting because when we started this chart, Mars was in Gemini and Venus was in Virgo. And now what we got here on this fourth part is that Venus is in Gemini and Mars is in Virgo. So this final square brings the dance to a resolution. In my mind anyway, Mars is direct again, moving forward through Virgo, the sign of discernment, precision, and the honest examination of what serves. And Venus in Gemini, the sign of the mind, communication, multiplicity of connection. And the square between Virgo and Gemini is both earth and air, and both the precise and the communicative, communicating both the analytical and the associative. So the final square is not a crisis, it is a completion. The tension between Mars and Venus has been building, deepening, and turning inward and reassessing across these 12 months by June 2027. And something has been understood that has not been understood in July 2026. And that's the wonderful thing I always find, that when we look back, generally, we can always see is, oh my gosh, I didn't understand that then and I get it now. Or you might read a book and then you might pick it up again, 6 months later, or you might listen to a video you listened to 6 months ago and you completely understand something completely different that you never even heard the first time round. So this is what's going on. By June 2027, something has been understood that was not understood in July 2026. And the drive has been tempered by what has been found in the depth of Scorpio retrograde. So something will come up in Scorpio retrograde. And the creative fire of Leo has been examined by the self-critical precision Virgo retrograde. And now the dance ends in a square between the sign of practical service and the sign of communicating. Communicating the mind, suggesting that what has been learned across these 12 months finally be articulated to the thought, to be thought and to be spoken, to be brought from the underground, from the Scorpio to the surface, to the light of consciousness understanding. So I mentioned a bit personal of my own Venus is in Aries at 18 degrees, but I'll talk about I'm going to do a video on my own chart and show you some what I call yods. They're called the finger of God and in conjuncts. I'm going to talk about that probably in a couple of days, which is learning curve for me, but I'd like to share my learning curves. And then if we now go to the next 12 months, as I said, it's July 26th to June 27, and the Aries and Aphrodite were caught in this net, we're caught in the, let's see if I get it right again, Hephaestus, I believe, Hephaestus. It's difficult to remember all of these names. So their love was exposed before all of Olympus, Ares and Aphrodite. And from the exposure, from the moment of being seen in their entanglement, because they were entangled, came eventually the children. So when they were seen, then the children came forth. As we said, Eros and Harmonia, desire, concord. The children, the fear and the dread, the dance between Mars and Venus across this 12-month period is not promising a comfortable or easy resolution, but it's promising something real and something that has been tested in the fire of Leo and the depth of Scorpio, which is important, and the self-critical precision of Virgo retrograde, the Mars Virgo retrograde as well, and what comes from the other side. So in June 27, when the fourth square completes, we will not, we'll be less naive and it will be something genuine. And this is the squares always offer a gift. I think charts offer a gift. We're individuals, life happens. I know that people can predict or they get worried about what might happen. I used to be worried about Saturn or different planets. It's, oh my God, am I going to survive? But we do. And we're here for the time that we're here and we're living our lives, hopefully to the best we can. And where we need help, we go get help and we look after the things and we nurture ourselves and we must love ourselves. And there's no joke in that. Proper self-love is being kind and also nurturing and also having some discipline with ourselves as well. And sometimes we need help with that. So Jeff Wolf Green did talk about Mars and Venus, which is worth checking out. His Pluto books. And Venus, he described as what the soul most deeply desires, not surface stuff, it's what the soul most deeply desires. So if I look at my 18 degrees Venus in Aries in my fifth house, I deeply desire creativity. I'm at my making a YouTube, doing a watercolor, writing on Substack, looking at writing my book, like the things I'm reading, like anything that goes towards creativity, that is my Venus working with me. And I have to listen to her. And Venus is the soul's deepest longing. So are we following our deepest longings? And I know for many years I didn't, because when we're younger, we don't understand these things. And I'm past my second Saturn return a few months ago. So anyway, the thing is that this is, moving across our lifetime. It's not just something that happens overnight. And then Mars in his framework is not just masculine energy, it's intention with the feminine. Mars is the action principle, which we all have, that is specifically in service of the Venus desire. So Mars is the actions that we take in order to, and my Mars, so then if I look at my Mars, it's in Taurus and it's in my sixth house. So this is through my daily actions, in the sixth house. It's through my daily stuff. Charts are so specific and they can be so beautiful to understand ourselves. And so there we go. I'm going to leave them there. Now I'm going to, if it's been a long video and you're still here, thank you very much. And subscribe if you wish. And I'll be back with more in a couple of days. Thanks for listening.